you all awake this morning?
Yes.
Are you sure? It's one of those horrible dull mornings, isn't it, where we don't seem to have that much energy and we're trying very desperately to perhaps cling on to the thought that we could be happy today. Let's hope we can be happy today. How many of you remember the football pools? Football pools are all now sort of out of fashion because we have a lottery. I remember the football pools. You had Littlewoods and Zetters, Vernons, and people used to put their money on the pools and they hoped that it would change their lives. I actually met a couple of people who were big winners on the football pools when I was much younger. And interestingly enough, they were big winners, and in some ways it did change their lives. What was really most upsetting was at the end of the day, they still had the same problems that they had before they had won their money. They still had arguments with their families. They still had the big questions over their marriage life and so on. Because money, surprisingly enough, does not actually bring the answer to very many questions at all. That's a commonplace. We hear it said many times. And yet when I ask people what they would like to do with their lives, their aspirations and so on, they're so very often surrounded by the idea of money and what money can buy you, and some distant dream in the future. Try it yourselves if you like. Ask people if they won the lottery, what would they like to do? How would it change their lives? When I've asked that question in the past, people have said things like, I would like to have a bigger house and a car. And then you say, okay, what would you do with your bigger house? And they sort of look at you as if to say, what are you talking about? Well, what would you put in it? How would you furnish it? How would you use it? And all of a sudden there's that blank look as if to say, I'd find out how to fit it and use it and so on. And what about this big car business? Why should people want a bigger car or a faster car? I believe there are national speed limits, so it's not going to do you any good to have something that goes 1,000,000 miles an hour. But people still feel that they ought to have these things. Look at young aspirational people, or not so young aspirational people, and look at them living the dream and what it is they begin to surround themselves by. Again, I've seen some of these young aspirational people lately. Brilliant homes, usually quite beige or cream or neutral in colour, because that, after all, is what our television programmes say that we ought to be doing with our houses nowadays. Nice and neutral, light, saleable. And of course there always is the big car as well. I was told there was a formula, I was totally amazed. Your car should be to the value of 2/3 of what you earn in a year. So there you are, run out, find the price of someone's car, and you can find out how much they earn in the year, according to popular myth. And yet, when you see these people living the dream, you have to ask yourselves, having had the car, and having had the house and everything else, what's missing, if anything at all? And all of a sudden, I tend to think with such people who've just begun to accumulate these things, what are missing are people. You don't see loads of people coming in and out of these houses. You don't see other cars driving up and actually spilling out people and sending them into this wonderful house. You don't see that whole interchange of human nature. You see, a lot of it is aspirational, isn't it? It's what will happen if I have this, if I can do this, if the future brings me prosperity. Now, there's nothing wrong with hopes and aspirations, but what it tends to do is it creates a rather fantasy world, which is not very real. And it stops us living in the here and now, and in the present. How many people can actually put their hands up and say, I am content to be sitting here today in the state that I'm in, and I have come to terms with who I am and what I have to do, and if the future brings me A, B or C, I will cope with it. The majority of people don't seem to be able to do that very well. They're full of anxieties about what is happening, what is going to happen, how am I going to manipulate it, and half the time we can't change what is happening to us in the world around us. Can we, however, look into ourselves? Can we actually be comfortable with ourselves and say, in actual fact, despite my hopes and my dreams, I am happy with who I am. I know that I get on with my neighbours. I know that I do the right things. I know that ultimately I am happy with the person that I am, and I can sleep well at night. I don't have anxieties. Few people can actually do that in my experience, because we live in a world of aspirations and dreams. We don't live in a world where we take ourselves seriously in the present, here and now, let alone taking people seriously in the present, here and now, who happen to be sitting next to us, or happen to be part of our families, or whatever. How many times do we hear about problems that people have had way after they've been solved, because we're not that engaged with them here and now? Well, how does that relate to our readings today? Well, think about dear old Jesus on the cross, with those wonderful people who are surrounding him, the two criminals and the soldiers and all the other people. Interestingly enough, one of those was aspirational and the other wasn't, if you think about it. The aspiration of one was to say, you failed. Let's all have a laugh at you. And everybody joined in. The other one lived in the here and now and said, this is the Messiah. When you actually get to your kingdom, can I be there? Jesus actually said, yes, you are a part of it because you are a part of it now. People who wanted a Messiah who was going to actually go and throw over the state of Rome. People who wanted a Messiah who was going to be king because their aspiration said this is what a Messiah must do. They were somewhat let down, were they not? And it was a simple criminal who actually saw the Messiah for who and what he was. And then listen to that reading of the shepherds who are no longer looking after their sheep. How many times do we as congregations and churches actually think to ourselves, we know the way we should run church. We know what it should be. It should be Anglo-Catholic. It should be evangelical. It should be middle of the road. It should be, and there are so many divisions nowadays, I can't really keep count of them. But are we not sometimes guilty of being those shepherds who are so taken up with our own vision of what the church should be that we miss actually what Jesus called us to be? A community of people living and working together to make his kingdom real upon this earth. And if you like it with bells and smells, or if you like it with prayers, does it really matter? As long as we're working towards that common purpose together. An institutional church, on a local basis, we still have our aspirations and we still sometimes get it wrong. And what about ourselves as Christians? What are we actually asking for when we turn to Jesus? Are we asking for him to wave a magic wand and make our lives perfect? Because he ain't going to do that, not in this world. Or are we saying, help us to be who we are? Help us to come to terms with the here and now, and help us to realise that that here and now is just as important to the people sitting around us. If I look down into the congregation now and I say, how many of you know this person? How many of you know if he's worried about something or anxious about something? How many of you know the story of his life? How many of you could tell me more than 2 things about him? If I walk over to this person and ask the same question, how many of you actually know this person? Our faith is about real people here and now. It's not about what could be, it's about what we are building here today. And we only build that when in actual fact we know each other, we love each other, we care for each other, and we work with each other. It's a desperate situation because we think we do it all the time. But do we? Look around you at the people sitting by you. Ask if you really know the stories of their lives. Ask if you know what's worrying them and have you put yourselves out to help. Ask if in actual fact we are truly building up the kingdom of Jesus Christ here on earth today. If the answer is yes, then God bless you. If the answer is no, then we need to try just a little harder. Amen.